Welcome everybody. Another geopolitical analysis video. Here, discussion with our friend Dionisi. Like you remember last time, we'll try doing these as much as we can. We both have other obligations and responsibilities, but this is great. It was a great discussion last time. I enjoyed it. How you doing, Dionisi? How are things over there in Athens?
Hello, Happy New Year. It's not that far from, 1st of January. It's a rainy day and a rainy night, now that I think of it. Yeah, everything's fine. A little bit of cold weather, the same madhouse, the same madness, but,
Yeah.
everything is okay.
Yeah, great, great. Yeah, here in Toronto, it's snowy. We have a really nice view here, lots of snowy terrain. We got snow the last few days after having a mild winter. The winter has been pretty mild so far, but lately it's gotten a little bit colder, which I love. I love the winter. It's one of my favorite seasons, so yeah, I'm excited. Well, speaking of winter, speaking of the new year has brought a lot of interesting events. There's so many things going on, which a lot of them are still unfolding. But after one of the main events that you mentioned also before we started recording this video are two things. Is first the election of Donald Trump, which again, no surprise there. We noticed that the Biden administration and Kamala Harris especially was a very weak candidate.
Yeah.
But also before the end of the year, we saw a major event happen in Syria, which is sort of like a precursor for what could happen in the Middle East, especially with the tensions rising. Um, Now, I know last time I asked you about what do you think is going to happen with Trump being elected for Europe, and a lot of the things that you mentioned and that we sort of ended up understanding is coming to fruition. You talked a lot about the weakness of Europe, and I want to get your opinion about this living in Europe because I noticed that major European governments are crumbling. They're losing faith from population. We're seeing a lot of right parties that are very nationalistic get on the rise because of the bad policies and leadership that followed all these years. But I'm looking at like France, for instance, Germany, what has been going on in Romania with some of the protests, the British government, the Georgian government, some issues in Moldova. We're seeing, like you mentioned last time, that it seems like Europe is fighting for its identity. That was one of the themes that you mentioned. So give us a little bit of insight what you're seeing with these countries and Europe. What's the chatter like? What's the
Well,
conversation that you're hearing?
one of the things that we need to remember is that Europe has no resources. Europe doesn't have the cheap energy access that it used to have.
Yeah,
Now, as far as my understanding goes, industry is moving away from Germany because the cost of energy for industry has skyrocketed.
yeah, yeah,
And especially with what we've seen just a few days ago, just a couple of weeks ago, with uh, Ukraine and Russia stopping transferring gas to Europe,
yeah,
because even while there was all this thing going on up there, still there was gas going through Ukraine to
yeah,
European Union,
yeah,
and this has stopped. So eventually, no matter what reserves of Russian gas was in the European Union, this is going to end,
yeah,
and the cost of energy and the cost of living is going to skyrocket,
yeah,
because either the European Union will have to buy from the US, which
yeah,
is going to be more expensive, or no matter what they're going to do, everything will be more expensive. More industries will move away from the European Union. The cost of
yeah,
living is going to be more, higher. So I see more tensions rising, and either the simple European guy will find a way to fend for himself, or it's
hmm
going to be European against European.
Yeah, interesting because I was reading over the weekend several Ukrainian drones targeted the Turk Stream pipeline, so the LNG pipeline coming from Russia. Uh, in this situation, we're seeing again that Russia is left to shut down the pipelines because they're saying, this is we're not getting paid by the Ukrainian government, right? Or they're being their contracts are not being honored. Of course, during a war, you can't really supply it to your enemy. you know,
It's to be
it,
expected. It's to
it
be
doesn't
expected.
make sense. Yeah, exactly. But one thing in terms of that I heard was that in Greece there's a large terminal, relatively large terminal that can cover Europe for several weeks, and that is the LNG terminal in Revithousa, which is west of Athens. Um, but commodity wise, I've been looking at the price of oil. I've been looking at the price of natural gas. Natural gas has been going up for several weeks now, and oil too. Right when oil was in the high 60s, now it's touching 78, 79, the WTI crude oil, which is very interesting because speaking of inflation, you know, we were promised by central banks that it's under control, we're going to raise interest rates, but from what we're seeing, interest rates are compounding and adding up to inflation because when you have higher interest rate to pay for loans and money is more expensive to circulate, it inevitably pushes the prices higher because the money supply is being squeezed out. And we've been seeing this now, especially with the balance sheet of many central banks. Uh, but yeah, it is very interesting development because one thing I said was I believe we're going to see inflation rise like in the 70s, where it had a big jump, it dropped, then it had a much bigger uh, rise later on. Um, but yeah, it's a I think we're going through very chaotic times, and when this happens, especially in this cycle of war, commodities do tend to run on the anticipation.
And one thing that people often forget, oil, for instance, oil is not only used for transportation. Oil, you make plastic out of oil, you create stuff out of oil. So all of this is going to be more expensive.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thousands of products are dependent on oil, transportation, but also the production. Um, One thing I wanted to touch on because I noticed over the weekend that there's been a lot of Russian advances, especially in the region of Donetsk, and the morale of the Ukrainian army has been admittedly over, especially in different social media outlets, is very low. We're hearing a lot of Ukrainians are just giving up, and they're not even fighting, or they're even turning against their own government. So we're seeing that we're at a tipping point where before the inauguration of Trump, which is on the 20th of January, we've had Syria, we've had all these governments that we talked about in Europe that are losing control. The governance is failing. Um, we're also seeing in the wider region of Syria, Turkey and Israel raise up rising up in the escalation there. But one thing I think is very interesting to touch on is that things in China are also looking that they're heating up, especially around Taiwan. There was admittedly a lot of movement and activity, a lot of drills from the amphibious forces of China. What are you seeing over there in that front? What
Well,
is your
in no
opinion
way.
being in the
I am
army
not.
too?
I'm not in any way an expert in China matters. Although I've been back in the day when I was a seaman, I was, lucky to be able to travel to China, travel to Taiwan, travel to Japan. But I'm in no way expert in Chinese matters. What I like to keep in mind is that one way to understand civilizations is to understand the games that civilizations have created. One traditional Chinese game is called Go. It's spelled like Go, but the pronunciation is Go. Now, in that traditional game, what you are actually trying to do is not to fight the pieces of your enemy. It's you try to surround the pieces of your enemy, so those pieces cannot receive help from any other pieces. So you're not trying to shoot at your enemy's pieces. You are trying to make them dependent on you and to have no other options. So if China can, surround and cut off Taiwan in a way that they do not have to fight around,
Yeah.
because that's what we see from China. They economically, surround. They economically move their pieces on their board, and they make the other guy to not have any other option but to rely to them. And in the end of it, if the Chinese do move against Taiwan, who is going to do what? Are the USA going to start World War III for Taiwan?
Yeah, it's very interesting because, leading up to the campaign, we were hearing this narrative of Trump. At least during Trump, there was no war. During Trump, there was this presence of a de-escalation, where the U.S. was trying to focus on domestic issues and focus on the economy, et cetera, et cetera. And then COVID happened, and of course, the world was in a complete lockdown. But it seems to me like what they call the Monroe Doctrine, which was a term coined in the 1800s, is showing signs of reemergence, especially in the foreign policy of the U.S., because we're seeing an aggressive stance of the U.S. against the European hegemony, and this is very interesting because the whole idea of this doctrine is that in the Western Hemisphere, the U.S. would have such a strong foreign presence that would restrict the European dominance. And we've seen this escalate with the fall of these governments, and it makes sense that China would try to at least catch up to these things and prepare, because the U.S. is becoming a very externally, in terms of its policies right now, is exerting a lot of pressure, like we noticed in Greenland, what has been going on with a lot of the media statements. This could be also bargaining and negotiation tactics, sure. But Greenland has been in the focus of the U.S. for a very, very, very long time, even before Trump came to power. And of course, it has to do with the minerals and the commodities. But most importantly, the exclusive economic zone that blockades some of the Arctic routes that China and Russia is aggressively trying to get access to, which is very interesting. But yeah, in terms of China, the reason why I asked you is because I think that the stock market too, and a lot of the world economy has been paying attention closely what's happening in Taiwan, because Taiwan is sort of like that last frontier in the East where Western presence and influence is holding strong. And given that we're seeing a lot of governments being toppled, we're seeing a lot of territorial disputes, it makes sense that the last piece, the last shoe to drop, would be Taiwan. And then then everything is going to open up. Pandora's box is going to just open up with more chaos. And
I understand that we're going to see a different Trump administration than the previous Trump administration. And to some extent, I don't see the US being able to do anything less than what they are going to do. I think that by now we all know that the era of US dominance, that it was the only superpower in the world after the fall of the Soviet Union, this is over. Now there are going to be more than one superpower, and everybody will try to carve his territory.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think that's why it makes sense that the U.S. is focusing a lot in the region that it can control.
Exactly.
Greenland, Canada.
So I understand that the U.S. will try to control, as much as they can of South America, as much as they can of Canada and Greenland. And if they get into this kind of bargaining and moving their pieces, they might be, if they get the resources they want from Greenland or Canada, they might be able to just let Taiwan go because they cannot have all the pieces. They cannot have all the board. But still, Europe is going to have the big problem because USA is going to say, we're not interested in Ukraine. Europe, if you want to keep helping Ukraine, go on and help them.
Yeah.
So I think, and that's a very good way to keep Europe dependent on the US.
Exactly.
Let Europe crumble, so they need you.
Yeah, a lot of headwinds there for Europe, and like it comes to no surprise because, again, speaking of the Monroe Doctrine, we've seen this first economically, that the US was flashing a signal to the rest of the central banks that we are constricting the Eurodollar system. And to be fair, there is a lot of discussion that, oh, you know what, the North America, US wants a weakened Europe. US is always trying to control Europe through NATO, etc. But if you look at the financials, if you follow the money trails, Europe has taken advantage by large the American dollar and the US treasuries by creating the Eurodollar system, which has expanded. There's more dollars circulating outside of the US than actually within the US. And I think one thing that the Fed was looking and doing, the Federal Reserve of the United States, was how to siphon that money, how to restrict that flow and deprive several other banks, because I think central banks are at war at each other. And we noticed this especially with the interest rates, because for a long time, the City of London was in control of the interest rates of the overnight lending. So I think that now you've had the financial exhibition of power, and I think the other could be military, and we could see the U.S. shuffling different military forces. But I'm surprised. One thing I want to discuss about Syria, I'm very surprised. Like, I knew Syria was part of the project of the new American century of the neocons who were always trying to topple certain governments, and Syria was on that list.
In order to get Iran.
Yeah, and then Iran. But I was surprised because apparently Syria took much longer because Assad was proven, to have strong allies. But I'm surprised by what has happened right after it in terms of Russia totally having to withdraw some of its bases. Sure, there weren't that many bases they didn't have a lot of military power there. But I'm surprised with what has been going on with some of the Navy. The Navy, apparently, outside of the ports of Syria, has been confounded there, has been confined, and that the Syrian government, the new Syrian government, is not allowing the Russian ships to leave the area. That's very interesting. Have you heard something about that? Do you know what's going on in that?
Well, first of all, we were all taken by surprise. Nobody expected that in just a few days, the previous regime would be toppled just like that. For me, the main problem is that we are looking at Libya 2.0. Because if you pay attention, and I'm paying attention mainly because of drones and all the, on OSINT platforms like, X, previously formerly known as Twitter and Telegram, all the time I see, groups in Syria fighting other groups in Syria with FPV drones and kamikaze drones and stuff like that. So I don't see Syria becoming stable and peaceful for some time. Yeah. It's, in my opinion, it's going to be Libya 2.0.
Yeah.
And there are many things to be discussed about that. Now, one thing that one should keep in mind is that obviously it is a fail for that part of the world. It's a fail, for Russia and for Iran, what happened in Syria. They were strategically defeated. At the same point, you cannot save someone who doesn't want to save himself. The main reason Syria fell is because the Syrians didn't want to fight anymore.
Yeah.
And there were many analysts that suggested, and it sounds logical to me, that when the Syrians won against the terrorists in 2015-16, they had great expectations that they, never met. Now, keep in mind that, Syrian oil was not controlled by the Syrian government. It was and is controlled by US.
Yeah.
So they won a war. They saved part of their country, but their quality of life was, you had the Syrian fighters being paid something like $30 a month, while the terrorists were paid something like $2,000 a month. And like it or not, those guys are terrorists. Okay, they were the formerly known as jihadis.
Yeah.
But now they're celebrated as Syrian government or whatever you want to think about it.
It's unbelievable how they rebranded al-Golani, who was part of al-Nusra, was connected with al-Baghdadi, now he took off the whole, what do you call it,
and there was a 10 million US dollars bounty hand was still on his head when he was celebrated as the new face of Syria, which is crazy.
Yeah. And how did the Western media have such access to all of the infamous zones of Assad where the torture chambers were, and how did they gain so fast access? It shows you again how the whole Al-Qaeda connected to CIA never died. Like all these terrorist groups, all these Islamists, they're just another branch of secret US intelligence and the influence that it still has in that region. It's just incredible to see how in a zone that war that has been going on since the last 7-8 years, if not longer, all of a sudden you have these Western reporters having access to all these areas. It seems like this was premeditated, pre-organized, and that I don't doubt that this was probably a discussion between Russia and the US saying, hey, you know what? We want you out of there. Sure, we'll give you a piece of Ukraine. We'll let you, take over Ukraine.
One thing that people forget is that wherever there is concentration of power, there are sides, even among the same sides. Yeah. In the US, everybody's talking about Trump, but it's not just Trump running the show. Yeah. It's conflicting interests. The same, I think, is also in Kremlin. There are conflicting interests. Everybody's talking about Russia as if there is only one Russia. But I don't think that Sergei Lavrov has the same worldview as other prominent people in the Kremlin. So yeah. I think that we think of this side or that side, but within sides there are also conflicting interests.
Of course. And that region is very interesting right now. That it was, speaking of Syria, Syria was actually one of the first topics of my first videos. This channel, Geopolitical Analysis, started with Syria because I was touched by what was going there, and I was seeing so many different players. And I think what really, really changed, global politics was Syria, because for the first time you saw, after the Cold War, you saw the Russian presence just saying no and blocking the Western influence there. When I say Western, more the American influence there. And it was very interesting to see, because that was a determining moment where the fork on the road indicated that you have Russia versus the US having these proxy wars like they used back in the Cold War.
For Russia, it is a defeat and a loss. Still, for Russia, it is more of a prestige defeat and loss.
Yeah.
But for Iran, it's an existential threat what's happening.
Yeah.
So Russia, they can still operate. Russia, they can still use their, hypersonic missiles from, that go all around the globe. They still have assets. But for Iran, they had a buffer zone. They had ways to, send equipment and weapons to their proxies, and now they don't.
Yeah.
For me, and since we are both Greeks, so for us it's the interest of Greece. It's funny here in Greece we've been listening pretty often that we stand with Israel because Israel is an enemy of Turkey. But in Syria, it was proven that, pretty much Israel and Turkey, they work together and they slide Syria.
Yeah, they
So,
had a common enemy, so
yeah.
an enemy of my
So,
enemy.
yeah, but that means that if tomorrow there is a strategic interest, between this country and that country to sell us off, if we don't support and take care of our country like the Syrians didn't, nobody will.
Well, I think one interesting thing, especially looking at it from the lens of Greece, um, Greece right now is at a very interesting point of time where if this opportunity is snatched correctly, I can see a reemergence of Greece in the region. Um, and I do think that a lot of the Western powers are banking on Greece being able to not only be a pillar of stability, but having a more active role in the coming years. Because I do see that although Israel and Turkey, I mean, they have huge economic ties. Uh, I do think that until the Kemalists, until Erdogan is out, Israel will not stop the pressure. And I wouldn't be surprised if Israel attacked Turkey. I personally think that Turkey was created by British Zionist powers. And I think that although Syria seems like a temporary victory of Turkey, I think that this is the beginning of the end of the modern Turkey that we know. Because
How
look at
probably
if we look at the Kurds,
how probably would it be for a country like Israel with what's the population of Israel? 2 million, 5 million? What's the population of Israel? Although they have nuclears and some attacking capabilities, but what would be the possibility of this country of Israel going against the second NATO country, the second biggest NATO army, without having anybody's backing?
well, this is the thing. I think that maybe it's not going to be a full-on attack like we've seen with against Hezbollah or against Hamas, but this could be a very covert hybrid type of war. Like you remember a few months ago, there was an infiltration of Turkey's factory manufacturing of I think it was some type of weapons manufacturer center, and it was essentially infiltrated by a few Kurds.
Mm-hmm.
Did you hear that? Now, I don't think that they had that without the backing of either Israel
Or the US.
or the US. I mean, the US, I wouldn't be surprised, but with Israel there, I do think that until I do believe that the whole conflict that Turkey and Israel has is something that will escalate in the near future, because although Israel felt very comfortable seeing Assad fall, it took advantage of some of the mountains in Syria outside of Damascus and attacked a lot of the warehouses where they had a lot of ammunition and weapons. So that shows that there was no trust with the new government, but also by taking more Syrian land, it indicates again that this is a contrary to the Turkish interest, which Turkey wants to create a buffer zone, a bigger buffer zone, because something we haven't discussed, Kurdistan is on the table again, and much more aggressively so. Do you think that we could see in the next coming years the formation of Kurdistan? Do you see, because Israel is backed by the West. Another country that could be created is Kurdistan, backed by the West, and that could be perhaps the final nail in the coffin of Iran's expansion.
Again, as a Greek, my main concern is Greek interest. Nothing happens without horse trading. Nothing happens without, giving something to having something. So if, Kurdistan, if the creation of Kurdistan means give Turkey the green light to go and attack another country and take a few islands, thank you very much. I'm not interested.
I don't think. Do you believe that could be connected?
I think that Turkey doesn't do anything without having the green light of other powers.
Sure, absolutely. It's proven that it doesn't risk without having any backing. But
exactly.
Do you really think that it would go unforfeited? Like, I mean, forfeit. Like, do you think that Greece would forfeit? The government would forfeit region.
Let me put it like that, because I don't want to lose my job yet. So let me put it like that. We should be taking care of ourselves. So even if Western powers wanted to bet on us, I don't know if our establishment is going to bet on us, or our establishment prefers to be selling infrastructure, building infrastructure, working with other countries' establishments.
Well, it would be interesting to see, because I do suspect that.
So if some Western powers wanted to bet on us to be the pillar of stability and all this stuff, thank you very much. Where do I sign? But if we are the easy, the easy scapegoat or the easy bargaining chip, thank you very much. I'm not interested.
Well, one thing that we've seen the last few centuries is Greece has been on the right side of wars. And even when odds were against us, we regained land and created a much more respected, much more respected foreign influence in the region. At this point, I have to agree. I don't see the current government, but then again, it is hard to imagine.
I say establishment, not government.
Yeah, it is hard to imagine that the allegiance of Israel, Egypt, Greece, Cyprus, with the Saudis, sure, UAE too included. I think that chain is quite formidable for Turkey, and I think Turkey knows this. I don't think that Turkey would be able to really break that and to have a say, because if we look at what has been going on also with the maritime delineation of the exclusive economic zone, Turkey has been going from just pretending like it's having some victories, but at the end things get canceled, like the whole Libyan exclusive economic territory that was essentially drawing illegal lines, that was bypassing the Cypriot exclusive economic zone. The Libyan government canceled that. We're seeing now endeavors to create one with Syria, but they can do that as long as they're not trespassing the Cypriot region, right? The Cypriot exclusive economic zone. I mean, it's very hard to predict what's going to happen, of course, but I think all in all, the tensions are building up. And at some point, tension, especially when you have countries that are so close to each other, have different interests, and opposing interests, let alone different interests.
You know,
At some point, something breaks out. The longer
yeah.
I think we're keeping this dampened, the
You know
bigger
something,
the reaction.
you
And I
know,
think Turkey is feeling the pressure more than anybody else because
yeah, but you know something, we need to give credit where it is due. Now, Turkey, like them or not, whether it is on our interests or not, you know, they have a vision and they're working towards that vision.
Mhm.
Whether this vision happens or not, that's another story. But they are building their navy, they are building their war capabilities. They are an 80 million population country. They want to go to 100. They have their own, military industry producing their, whatever they need for war, and they are ready, to do what they need to do. Now, alliances are good, but alliances are built on whether you are strong enough to do your part in an alliance. So do we want to compare, let's see the countries in the region and let's compare economy, army, and direction. Now, if, any superpower or any super organization is looking at the region, they want Turkey and they do not want to lose Turkey. NATO doesn't want to lose Turkey. So who is the weak link in the chain in the region? Turkey? I don't think so. Maybe at some point they decide to cut their feet off, but we're not there.
I think everybody knows the history of what Turkish expansion means for the region. And I do think that although Turkey has this larger vision, lightning doesn't strike twice, right? Or if it does, it's very rare. and and the odds are that how I see it is that we all know the agenda of Turkey. It's been since the fall of Constantinople, the Ottoman Empire expanded. We know that these revisionist ideas of Erdogan, we know where they lead. And I just think there's so many roadblocks in the way that it's highly unlikely that we know that Turkey is preparing for war, but I find it's highly unlikely that powers like France, for instance, France has lost a lot of territory in Africa. I don't think they can afford to lose a presence in the Mediterranean by having a larger Turkey. I don't see, and the reason why I'm thinking like this is because often if you looked at the timeline of Turkey's rise, it coincided with the British rise.
Okay.
So the Brits always, they supported Turkey because Turkey had this area of all the sea routes, and it was one aspect that was very, it was very alluring for the British colonialist powers because having a good relationship with Turkey, supporting Turkey, enabled the British conquest to maintain the and I'm talking about not militarily speaking, obviously, but mostly financially speaking, right? So I think at this point we're seeing the total collapse of British government. We're seeing the whole scandal so that has emerged recently in Britain, but most importantly, we're seeing that Britain is in debt several billions of dollars because of the Ukrainian war. So Turkey's allies,
Yeah, but now
are
Britain
running out
doesn't.
because
The thing. Sorry to cut you off, but now Britain is not. The role that Britain used to play is now played by the U.S.
Sure, it's always been like that. But I'm seeing what I'm seeing is that if if one of the legs of Turkey is cut off, which is the British influence and support. Second is Qatar. We know that Qatar has been funding Turkey's establishment and secret intelligence, etc., etc. At some point, when your backers are sort of done, are sort of depleted, then all falls on you. And I just don't see that Turkey has yet the ability to maintain authority in that situation. I just think what I'm seeing is that its back is pressed against the wall, and it's either do or die. And in this situation, I really don't see how Turkey in longer than 5 years can exist the way how we know it.
What I see is that I just compare where Turkey was 20 years ago and where, my country was 20 years ago, and where my country is now and where Turkey is now.
Sure.
How it will be in 5 years from now or 10 years from now? As I said before, I am pro-Greece, first and foremost. If the Western powers realize that they cannot allow for a new Turkish empire to rise, and we are the pillar of stability, and we should be the wall, like in ancient times, Greece was the wall against the Persian Empire. Now it's not the Persians, it's the Turks. So if the Western powers realize that, thank you very much. If they don't, and they keep betting on Turkey, because it wasn't only the British betting on Turkey, the Germans have supported Turkey.
There you go. And where's Germany now? Germany's in the toilet.
Yeah, but the thing is that now it's, what is the US of A going to do? What is the new administration going to do? If they keep betting on Turkey in order not to lose them to BRICS, where does this leave us? So let's wait and see.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. With Trump, I think Trump, he speaks from both of the side of his mouth. He's somebody who can say he's my friend, and then you could see his government doing things against. He's a businessman. So in terms of that, if it's not going to benefit the U.S., but at the end of the day, again, sure, there's a talk that the extremist Islam has taken over Europe in many aspects. A lot of areas in the West have been overrun by Islamist extremists. It's a discussion whether or not that is directly aiding Turkey, which we know is a hub of terrorism forever since its inception. But I do think that one thing, whenever things get hazy, and whenever I'm seeing a lot of conflicting scenarios, or I'm seeing a lot of clout, and the future becomes a little bit opaque, one quote that comes to mind is from Albert Pike. And this was always the discussion, that the end game of all this is to manufacture a war to such degree where you'll have the Jewish, Muslims fight in this endless war until nobody's left. And what I've been seeing the past little while is this endless war, both on the media front, both on the military front. We're seeing this reemergence of holy wars, of religious wars, right? Which I think, again, is a tool of the governments, is a tool of the hegemonies to create these artificial wars. But I'm really interested to see what is Turkey's future, because the future of Turkey, in my mind, at least from what has been going on, is hanging by a thread. You could say the pendulum can swing in a very positive outcome, but you could also say that it will be a very, very detrimental.
Always in motion, the future is, yes. Well, the thing is, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know the future. We couldn't predict what happened to Syria. So obviously, we cannot predict the future. I'm just stating that, as I said before, even if I don't like, what Turkey is doing, they have a vision and they are working towards it. I wish other countries were also doing that, having a vision and implementing it.
Yeah, I think that the times are such that many countries now are waking up, and I do see that because history often doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And I do think in this situation, a lot of Western countries are going through revisionist times, and I do think that society has had enough. It's until society shifts, that's when the establishment can persuade the society into taking certain. Because I think that right now we're seeing this emergence of nationalistic attitude, and I do believe that at some point the governments have to follow, or else great revolutions will happen. And I do believe that Europe is slowly waking up to the reality that it's been way too soft, way too lenient. And just like stocks, many times it's until the price drops to very low levels, you shouldn't be expecting a bounce or a turnaround. So I think we're at this inflection point in Europe, especially.
As you said before, history rhymes. It doesn't really repeat itself. So we don't see anything that we haven't seen before.
Yeah.
Historically. But at the same point, there are major differences. As you said before about the demographics of the European continent, when you have cities that the most common name for newborns is Mohammed. That's something that you never had before. And keep in mind that you have generations that have been raised with Hollywood, generations that have been raised with Netflix. And I don't know if those younger generations, allow me to bust them a little bit, if they are going to be eager to go through hardship to save something that they don't feel to have any connection with. So I don't really know.
Yeah.
I'm not very optimistic, when I also use these factors.
Yeah, definitely. But back then, especially in our grandfather's generation, there was an ethos, there was a morale of where hardship paid off, and people back then had higher capabilities in terms of battling with attrition. Because right now it's a mental and spiritual warfare that the younger generation is going through. It's true. And when I talk about warfare, I mean the addiction and the weaknesses that are weaknesses being idolized almost in certain parts of the West. And you do see this contrast of the East and the West, where the East is trying to strengthen its roots and its identity and its philosophies and its belief systems, and the West is in sort of this la la land, which reminds me of the early Roman times, where there was
the fall of the Roman, the fall of the Roman Empire,
so much conceit and arrogance that they were the center of the world, that it was eventually the point of the downfall. So interesting to see what will play out. I'm surprised by the acceptance of a lot of the Trump admissions. Like, I'm surprised by what we're seeing when it comes to internally in the U.S. You're seeing a lot of discussion about the vaccines again. Apparently, up to 6 states are looking to do a class action lawsuit against some of the vaccination companies. We're seeing RFK Jr., who he's trying to change things when it comes to big pharma and its lobbying capabilities. So I'm really interested to see what the next few years will bring. But also, where I'm pessimistic is with the emergence of AI and its application. That's one thing. I don't see AI as, sure, it will create opportunities for many people, but I think overall, I'm not really confident that it will benefit the greater masses. And this is something that economically too will affect millions of people worldwide. And already demographically speaking, we're on a decline. And we're also on a decline in the East. Like, it's very interesting to see how worldwide the population is on a steep decline in the next several years, which again raises all these questions and all these conspiracy theories about depopulation. Could it be vaccinations? Could it be the medicine? Could it be the technologies that are being used? So yeah, this overall, it's funny because one thing ties to the topic, so it's interesting, and that's a whole different can of worms now. We've reached an hour. What is something that you want to discuss before we end this? How are you feeling about the topics? Is it something you want to touch on? Something
well, I think that 2025 is going to make our world look much more weird. If it was a role-playing game, the campaign setting is going to, really unexpected routes. I wouldn't be surprised if Andrew Tate eventually does become the prime minister in the UK. That would be hilarious. By the way, Andrew Tate, if I'm not mistaken, is a Muslim. So, yeah, so let's see where this is going to lead. The way I see things, as I have mentioned before in our previous, chats, Russia and Ukraine, they cannot lose, but there is no clear victory for them. Ukraine, if you check the demographics, has gone from being a country of 40-something million population, losing something like 6-7 million that live in the regions that are annexed by or liberated or annexed or whatever one, depending on the side one supports, he will choose the language. They have lost those millions of people, and there were something like 14 million refugees. Yeah. So, let's say that tomorrow the conflict ends. What is going to be the population of this country, and how much debt is this country in? And, again, this will keep going on for some time. All the debt is going to end up in EU. US is going to make a profit out of it. So it's not ending anytime soon, even if the US backs up from it, because there is money to be made and there is debt to be created, which is profit for other people.
Yeah.
And, for us drone guys, experimentation and, innovation doesn't end. Fiber optic drones is, one of the major breakthroughs for the last month. So let's see what's coming next. So yeah, I think we are simply, 6 months from now, the world is going to be an even more weird place than today.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that there's a lot of things that we're going to be surprised, and let's see, because 2025 came in like a bang, and I do think if we look at different cycles, there's one guy, Charles Nenner, who's very good with charting different trends. We are in a cycle of war, and I do think that more revisionist ideologies will surface. One area in the Balkans it could be potentially another area in focus of tension. We're seeing now something that I've been looking. We're seeing now Serbia distance itself from Russia. What are you seeing there? Because I found the prime minister or president of Serbia, he was quite vocal about different things of the EU. And I'm very surprised to see that he has distanced himself from Russia. And in Serbia, all in all, Are you seeing that he's seeing an emergence of the Monroe Doctrine and is trying to position himself favorably towards Trump, or what? Because I'm surprised. I heard that there was a cancellation of some of the weapons from Russia and some other things.
One of the things that the West does, in a very, very good way, let's say, not good way, but, very effectively. One of the things that the West does is to make you understand that either you are with us or you are against us. And if you try to be neutral, if you try to be the middle ground,
Yeah.
You're against us. I really believe that Serbia understands that, I see that Serbia were trying to be neutral. Because if you see the map, they're surrounded.
Yeah.
So they are trying to be neutral. They are trying to be the middle ground. They are trying to, to not choose a side because they cannot choose a side. Every time they are taking a pro-Russia stance, they have issues with Kosovo. And, Serbia, they are doing good for themselves. The economy is doing better than it used to do. Tourism was doing better than it used to do. They have risen from that destroyed country that, we know who destroyed them, but that's another thing. So they are doing good for themselves, and I believe that they will try to avoid getting dragged into a war. So I understand their prime minister trying, to balance stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And you know what? Like you said, Serbia cannot afford, given their surroundings, the neighboring countries, they cannot really afford to go through further hardships because of this polarization of these two powers. So it makes sense in this, and that's what I'm talking about, revisionist countries, that I think we're going to see a lot of countries emerge and abandon certain alliances or try to re-strengthen their own influence in their own region. Because like you said, we are in this multipolar world, and it seems that globalization is right now in this phase of topping out, and now it's more of a regional thing. Interesting, because I looking at the history of Serbia, of course, there are a lot of enemies, just like Greece. There are a lot of neighboring countries that have been proven enemies, and it makes sense in that way. Yeah.
One thing I would like to share with you, I have stupid ideas. Okay, I have some stupid ideas. One of them is so what I would really would like to see my country to have done, when this whole situation with Gaza started, I would really like my country to have taken kids from Israel and kids from Gaza and bring them here and have, counselors, psychologists to heal their traumas, to have them live together, to teach them, coexistence, peace, and my country being a place where the next generation of Palestinian kids and the next generation of Israeli kids could, have been taught that they can coexist away from hatred, away from all this BS. That's what I wish I would have seen.
Do you think to the extent Greece has contributed, though? Do you think that the last several years since the 90s, do you think Greece has tried to to some degree do that? Because when I was living in Greece,
we didn't even help the Orthodox people in Syria. What are you talking about? No, we haven't. But we could have been peacemakers. We could have been, I'm not talking about even resolving conflicts or whatever, just help the kids. We could have been a place where kids from conflict zones could have been brought in and helped. And that would be something that even if you saw it, as a cynicist, even if you use that as a bargaining chip, as a diplomacy chip, we will have your children.
Yeah, we want cheap labor, Dionysi. That's why. That's why.
I told you I have stupid
We
ideas. I
allowed
know.
all these young men, all these Syrian and all these refugees and all these Pakistani and other people from Africa come into our country. And I don't know. I don't know. With that, I just feel that in Greece there was never, from what I remember, in serving in the military, you did see that Greece had this neutralizing capability of dampening extreme Muslim ideas or Muslim reactions or Jewish extremities. Like you never really had a huge clash come into the country, whereas in a lot of European countries, you do see that. You do see the segregation of the Muslims with the Jewish, etc., or the Christian. But yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting idea. I mean, I just think that the depth of hatred there is just so strong that it's really impossible to heal in this lifetime. But you're right, having the opportunity to heal and to actually come into as a binding force, especially when you're neutral and you're Christian, Orthodox, and you're able to touch the younger generation, which is the future. Yeah, but again, you see that, and this falls back to the Western hypocrisy that we preach democracy, we preach all these things, but the West is just another expression of the autocratic system that exists in the East. It's like they mirror each other in different ways, but at the end, it seems that the outcome is the same. The outcome is the same.
In the end, let's say that for the sake of argument, democracy works in West, okay? But there are some societies in the world that they are not ready or they do not want democracy. Gaddafi was a bad guy, okay? But before Gaddafi, there was no Libya, and after Gaddafi, there is no Libya.
Yeah.
Before Gaddafi, there was civil war back there, out there. After Gaddafi, there is civil war out there. So, in order for Libya to exist, they need the Gaddafi. Remove Gaddafi, and you see what happens. So, some parts of the world, they are not ready for democracy, and they don't want democracy. Who are we to go and impose it? It worked for me, but
yeah, that's the whole idea of the Greek ethos too. That you can't really the ancient ethos. Yeah, you can't really impose something that culturally or civilization wise are not on the same level. And let's be honest, those areas are just not on the same level in terms of the belief system, in terms of the education system. They're on a complete different level. So you to expect that they will adopt and they will accept your ideologies and idiosyncratic ways of life is just naive. But it is a perfect it's a perfect narrative, and it's a perfect idea to have, a noble idea that you're bringing in something better. And even though your country is crumbling, I mean, I think if you split the map, most countries in the East have the population support in comparison to the West. Like, sure, Russia is not heaven. There are a lot of people that are afraid to talk. A lot of these Slavic countries, they do have, since the Soviet Union, fear of speaking out because they are affected, and the Putin establishment has proven that it silences its opposition in different ways, and especially the youth that are protesting. To some degree, I don't blame a lot of the establishment there, because they've been a target of the British and other foreign intelligence for such a long time that sometimes you got to take action in order to stifle any voices that are opposing you, because of the fear that, hey, this could be another Maidan revolution. This could be another revolution that can try to topple the government instability. So, but yeah, when you look at that map, more Eastern populations are supporting their government than the West. Like, no doubt. I have no doubt in my mind. Like we talked about all the European governments right now that have been losing support from its people, and evidently is having very, very low, support levels. Yeah. So it's very interesting. Like, look at Canada, the country I'm in right now. Look at what has happened with Trudeau. It took Trudeau so long to resign when the writing was on the wall. We all knew that at some point, he's just a dead man walking, politically speaking, because there were just so many allegations, so many scandals. And especially what was shocking is to see the whole truckers protest that still is something that a lot of people have not forgotten. And speaking, like, I hate when I hear it talking against the Russian government and the Chinese government, when we forget what happened here in Canada. There were truckers protesting just because they didn't want to get vaccinated and have the stupid vaccine passport and limitations in order to get on with their lives. And they were met with such fury from the government. Police were beating up innocent people who were really just supporting protests. And that's something that you would have seen in Russia or China if you would have believed the complete narrative of the media. So it's such a paradox, because we have this auspicious, looking system here that has this, this mechanism of like it purports itself as something great, but it's decaying from the inside. But instead of looking inwardly, we're looking at Russia and China, and we're judging.
Is anybody paying attention to what's happening in France? I mean, eventually Macron will be, appointing a new government every few weeks, and he refused to resign. Is this, a working democracy?
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not working. The way things are going, it's not working, and for the European continent, it's going to be the worst.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think that Europe is once again going to be a zone of more wars and conflict. Hopefully that doesn't happen, but let's see what this year brings. Where can we find you, Dionysi? Again, for those who are not familiar.
YouTube, Dionysios Bastas, and the Drone Pioneers podcast, and LinkedIn, Dionysios Bastas. If you have not taken an interest in what I say, if you don't work for any agency with 3 letters, you are welcome. And once again, what I say is my opinions. I do not express my employer. I do not express, anybody else's. Just my opinion, and that's it.
Yeah, beautiful, great. Okay. This was a great discussion. Thanks for your time, Dionysi, and I hope we do this again sometime.
I am at your disposal.
Thank you. See ya, guys. Like and comment, share the video below, and we'll see you soon.